computer. Okay, so that's taken care of. Let's see, I'm gonna just a couple of housekeeping things I wanted to talk about first, get your thoughts, then I'll review the agenda for today to make sure everybody knows what we're up to. As you remember, it's an hour and 15 minutes to try to get everything done we want to get done, which should work. We decided, just to recap, we decided last time that we would meet monthly, and they would meet by Zoom, which is what we're doing today, except every I think every quarterly we'd like to meet in person if we can, because it's just qualitatively different. So so the next month will be February, Friday, same time, same place, Friday the 17th of February. But then March, we'd like to try to do something in person. And I wanted to, we don't have to decide this today, but if there's sort of the will of the crowd, we could go ahead. I was wondering if in March we could meet on a Saturday or Sunday for lunch somewhere. And because it's really hard for people to get anywhere on a Monday through Friday between classes. And Shasha, I know you're in Boston, so it may not be possible for you to get up here, but we would like to meet in person, and Saturdays might be at least some prospect. So how does like a lunchtime, free lunch on a Saturday or Sunday work for people for getting together? Maybe not for maybe 2 hours instead of an hour and 15 minutes, but have lunch and just, enjoy each other's company mostly. Could a weekend work for most people if nobody's working? Okay, well, that looks good. So probably March, I keep missing the date. March 18th is a Saturday. March 19th would be a Sunday. Does anybody have a preference for Saturday or Sunday, or either one would work? Somebody expresses an interest or a preference, would probably go with that.
Saturdays work better for me.
That's good. That's good. All right.
Saturday, yeah, maybe Saturday.
Okay, 2 Saturdays. Then Saturday the 18th, I'll send a calendar invite so that we make sure it's on your calendar. Saturday the 18th, probably, I don't know. I know what would work is where some of you may remember we met at what was called the Frontier Cafe at the bottom of the Fort Andros building in Brunswick. It's now named Nomad, I think, but it's still a good space for meeting and eating and having lunch. So, and it's convenient and plenty of parking. So we'll probably do that unless somebody has a preference, in which case we'll maybe do that. But that's a good kind of central place. And Shasha, maybe you could take the bus up and have lunch together. That'd be fun too. Okay, tentatively Saturday the 18th of March, we'll get together in person and have lunch. All right, so let me just anything else about, I don't know that I've set the meetings for April, May, June yet, but I'll get around to that. We kind of know the routine. I'm going to do the screen share thing. And so what we're going to do today is so that we don't short shrift youth on boards, I put them first. So you guys got plenty of time to bring us up to speed on that. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now that Bethany and Steve and the project team have to talk about, and we're all going to be excited to hear about that. We're going to talk a little bit briefly about our communications within Intergen, what would work best for everybody for keeping up to speed, and Bethany's going to lead that. Then I decided, I asked everybody to listen to the interview with Maxwell Frost. I think and you may probably did, but in case you didn't, I thought I'd just play some clips out of that and then we can react to it if the technology works. I was really taken with that interview, as you could tell, and I'd like to know, it's so relevant to what Youth on Boards is up to and what Intergen is up to, that I thought it would be useful for us to talk about that. And then if time permits, I keep trying to fill you in on what our Climate Common is about, since it's sort of the home now of Intergen and Youth on Boards. So if we have time at the end, I put me at the end this time. So I'm just shortchanging myself, but we'll talk a little bit about that if time permits. It will kind of depend on how our discussion on 3 goes. So is there anything anybody else would like to add to the agenda that I should try to make time for or integrate? Seem okay for today? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. One more thing I'll say is that we know that not everybody is going to be able to make every meeting. Things come up, you have to be at them, and that's okay. It's just, if nothing else interferes, try to protect this time, whatever it is, 3rd Friday of every month at this time, and that would be great. But don't worry if you can't make it because something more pressing comes up. That's okay. It's just good to see whoever can be here.
John?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Richard.
You mentioned taking the bus up there and stuff. But we had one time talked about helping, especially the youth members and stuff, if they say they needed bus money, gas money, or things like that. Is this a feasibility
Yes.
thing? If there's anybody can request assistance that way?
Right. Good. Thank you, Richard. If anybody needs transportation money, just let me know and I'll take care of it. So
also carpooling, I'm sure that you can ask folks where they're coming from and get a ride too.
Yeah, that's right. Although may not be anybody else coming from Boston, but the bus comes from Boston, so we can reimburse you for the bus. Yeah, I did that a lot years ago. Anyway, it works fine. Comes into Portland. Actually, it comes into Portland on the hour or every hour. I can't remember what time, but every hour, hourly. And somebody might be able to pick you up from in Portland at the bus station and take you back if any of you are down the Portland way. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Okay. Anything else before we turn it over to Bethany and Steve and the rest of the team? Okay, Bethany or Steve, whoever's leading off, you have the floor. Bring us up to speed.
John, how much time do I have to ramble?
Well, let's say 20 minutes or so.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, we're not going to talk for 20 minutes.
Well, you never know.
For 20 minutes.
We might talk. We might have questions for 20 minutes. So go ahead and take whatever time you want.
Okay, yeah, I'll give it a go. Steve will weigh in with whatever I forgot. But there's a lot going on for Steve and I with Youth on Boards. There's so much going on in the past month, but what's the summary? So the summary is we've been working on this board readiness piece. We've been working on also youth readiness, and the good news there is we have a youth orientation curriculum put together, a session planned with Mia, with Olivia and Najina at the Maine Environmental Education Association, and some of the folks in this meeting have been invited to that. So we're excited to say we now have a draft of what it will be like to orient young people to the basics of how boards operate, and hopefully it's the start of the information they need to know to feel ready to be on a board. So at the end of January, we're hosting our first trial session of that, which we'll be getting feedback on, and we'll be using that feedback to improve it. The other really exciting thing going on is that we have just nominated 2 people to the Board of Maine Conservation Voters, one of whom is Sarah, who's in this room actually. So congratulations, Sarah. The other person is someone who's outside of Intergen. And so those two folks will be going through our orientation. They will be shadowing their first board meeting for Maid Conservation Voters. And we're also at the same time, Steve and I are working in more of a consulting capacity with the board to make suggestions to them on ways that they can be more inclusive to young people. So we've done a lot of prep. The prep is starting to come together, and this is our first, like, actually putting the boat out in the ocean and seeing where it goes. So there's that piece, and we're continuing to work on potentially placing some folks on Maine Audubon's board later this year, as well as Steve and I are constantly doing more networking, more outreach, trying to build more partnerships. And what else? John, Sarah, and others are aggressively fundraising, and they're doing an amazing job. So there's quite a bit of grant applications going out right now, trying to secure us our full budget for 2023. That's the short of it. Steve, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I'll just add a couple things on the fundraising side. I think everybody knows we received a grant from the Onion Foundation. We have a grant request in to Broadreach Fund, and we're about to make an application to Sewell, and we're also probably, undoubtedly, and this again with a bit of help from Sarah, make one to the Maine Community Foundation. And there's one more small one that I forgot. I can't remember the name, but Anne would remember it, who's not here. So that's in process as well. It's also demanding a fair amount of time, but we hope relatively soon to be able to say that we're able to fund our activities for 2023 and maybe even have an oar in the water for 2024. I think the other thing to mention is the way the project team has been operating, and Bethany might have something to add here. The way the project team is operating is we've sort of been one-on-one on different tasks. Haley, for example, helping out on the Coastal Mountains piece. Sarah on a number of different parts. Kayla's been involved in some of the work for Heart of Biddeford. Anne and John and Kathy have been much involved in the fundraising part, but both Bethany and I think it's really, really important to have a meeting of the project team in February and to really ask the question, what do we want going forward? Bethany is also getting a lot of interest from some young people she's talked with about board roles, about their interest in the project and possibly being on the project team too. So all of that, I don't know whether you want to add something to that, Bethany, and maybe ask one of the questions that we had in mind too.
Yeah, I think folks who are on our project team who are at this meeting, maybe you felt like, oh, we just reach out to you and ask you random stuff, but you don't really get to hear the full picture until you hear us give an update like this. So that is the goal. I'm going to send out a request to schedule a project team meeting, and the number one item of discussion will be, what should the project team actually look like, and how can we actually stay more in touch and get more done and be more connected? So that's all coming up. But yeah, I want to spend the rest of the time that John gave us just asking for suggestions from everyone on a couple of questions that Steve and I have. And the first one is related to this, which is, we're trying to think about how to build the Youth on Boards project team as something that is sustainable, and it's not just supported by a couple people, and it's something that has momentum that carries on even if a couple people have to leave or take a break. So I guess, the question is, I'm wondering how we can create a project team that navigates the fact that we have people who are in school, they might be going to college or grad school, and they need to leave for a couple of years. And then, so how do we basically build a sustainable and continuous group of people who are able to work on this, knowing that no one wants to sell their whole life to this project? And so that's a question that we have, and I know it's really open-ended, but I know that folks here have worked on a lot of different projects and you have a lot of different experience. So I'm just looking for any insights you have on how to make this work more sustainable, and the fact that it's shouldn't just be Steve and I kind of, if one of us has to leave, I don't want this to just fall away. So
think just to add the way that Bethany and I have talked about it is we really are really trying to start a movement as much as anything else. And we're not trying to start a company and or a nonprofit organization in itself. And so, and both of us have been it's been pretty operationally intense, and it would obviously continue to be that way. So any thoughts that you have about sort of design and thinking about this project, and how do we make it into a movement? How do we make it into something that is sustainable?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think you might think in terms of select organizations that you actually try and acculturate to the whole idea so that they incorporate this both into culture and strategy and as leaders. And it's hard because you don't want like I'll just pick this because it's kind of a sort of example, like the Batons of Maine, because that is beyond aspirational for the average Maine organization. I mean, average Maine company, like Batons of Maine is in its own league kind of thing. So can you think of like leaders who are, people look up to them, but they're not looked at as out of my league. They're actually looked at as, I could follow, other organizations say I could follow that organization. So in the context of land trusts, you might want to nose around to find, there are some land trusts that are very highly successful because they've got a great donor base and they would be easy to work with in terms of this idea. But they would always be looked at as, well, they got the donor base to do that kind of stuff. I mean, off the top, I don't know what that means, but it probably means not like a land trust, for example, in southern Maine. It means probably a land trust in perhaps the Augusta area or the mid-coast region, where there's enough resource that they're kind of somewhat of a leader, but they're not the best in class or the first adopter or early adopter type. It's something that's more, I can't think of a balanced word to use, but and the same thing in terms of, perhaps with town government, South Portland, it'd be easy to get them to think in terms of town government to do this. Again, maybe some mid-central or mid-coast Maine towns might be actually better. Part of the flip side, actually, in the initial stage is also better learning labs in terms of those experiences will tell you what the pitfalls are and difficulties are for a more representative entity in Maine, as opposed to these first adopter type organizations. Is that helpful at all? Or, I mean, TNC might be good, though they're kind of they're a first adopter because they work in so many different places in Maine. And they might aspire to actually shepherding this elsewhere. But I don't know. Or the same thing with Maine Coast Heritage Trust. I'm just thinking environmental organizations because that's what I know.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like to me, Steve and Bethany and others, we've focused on the early adopters just so we could get something done right now, just so it wasn't such a hard uphill battle to get youth placed on boards. And from talking to Steve this morning, and we're learning a lot about just how to go about doing this, even with the early adopters. And then hopefully we can take that knowledge and work on some tougher nuts, maybe. Is that, Andy, is that what you were trying to suggest for sustainability, to try to not just get the early adopters, but the later folks too?
But
I think other people actually had some comments. I'm just going to hold. I think.
Okay,
Kayla,
anybody else? Jump right in, Kayla.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than what Andy was going at, but as far as sustainability goes, I have recently been working with Maine Youth Power, and maybe like integrating ourselves or associating ourselves with them could help with our sustainability. Because I mean, they have like a huge social media following, which I say huge, and as huge as it can get really for being like a central Maine based, very specific thing. But they seem to have they have their feet in the ground and they are pretty persistent. And maybe like following with that persistency could be really helpful in keeping us sustainable.
Yeah, I think both Andy and Kayla seem to be saying, I mean, the extent to which you could get some other organizations that are pretty well more diffuse, have more diffuse base in Maine to carry the water for us and be, if you want to start a movement, you need some other people to be willing to really do that. And so dissemination is an important part of the task going forward.
Well, and the other organization I would mention, and I know that you met with them early on, was the Maine Association of Nonprofits.
Yeah,
I think
that's
they're
great.
in a position to be influencing and communicating about the importance of this issue, particularly as they're working with people who are thinking about joining boards. So I think, again, thinking, as Kayla was saying, how do we infuse this concept with other allied organizations so that they're helping carry some of the water moving forward.
So we need both. We need, just to recap, we need both a network of youth, a pool of candidates coming into the system, and we need the recipients, the organizations, nonprofits, and hopefully for-profits that are saying, oh, we should be doing that, and expanding that pool too. And it's we just need to grow our network in both directions very deliberately and systematically. And I think we are. It's only a few months into it. I think I've been writing too many budgets lately, because I thought you were going to ask about fiscal sustainability, but that's
Yeah.
not what you're talking about. So that's a whole nother conversation sometime, maybe. Yeah.
I think too that Bethany and Steve, how you've kind of led, or the approach that you've used to kind of build this movement, has incorporated lots of documentation between just interviewing people and the change makers table. And John and I were talking about, creating a stipend structure. And I feel like we're all trying to really write everything down and kind of have a how-to for board readiness and youth training, and having an archive of those documents really builds a foundation to assist our broader network in the future to rely on that as they move forward. So to continue to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just it's not really related maybe to the thread of conversation, but I think I have been only marginally involved, but Sarah and I working on this stipend policy. How much are we going to pay, and what are the legal obligations and the tax obligations of the youth, and on and on. And it turns out to be a much bigger question than I thought at first. And I think Steve and Bethany are finding that there's a lot more to this than they might have thought 6 months ago. This is not a trivial undertaking, what we're doing here. I don't mean to, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But I think we're accomplishing a lot in terms of learning how to do this right. And I feel really good about how methodical and deliberate we are. That's a cheerleading kind of talk, but I know I'm learning a lot by just participating in this stuff I didn't actually know I was going to need to know. But we're going to need to know if we want this to go to scale. So we're covering a lot of ground, seems to me.
I'm wondering, John, if there's some sort of if we can create an email list or some kind of communication list of these organizations that that you're dealing with, and then if there is a need for new team members and things like that, we can send out a news release, some sort of a thing to these organizations, and they in turn can republish them in their newsletters, which a lot of them have, and things like that, and promote it in their own in-house communications and newsletters and things like that. But it should start from what we could be a central source for that as a news release or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like, Richard, you're hitting on kind of what I was gonna say, which is like, it's great to have all these connections to all these organizations. The reason we're having so much traction is because everyone is saying, oh, I've always wanted to do this, but I've never really had the time, or it hasn't been my organization's place to do this. So we're glad you are doing it. The struggle then is like, okay, so we're connected to Maine Youth Power, we're connected to the Land Trust, we're connected to these folks, but let's say right now we're running this project team, but 2 or 3 folks, accept positions like PhD positions, they end up going away, or like, God forbid, Steve or I has something come up where we have to step away for a couple of months. It's like thinking about what happens if we're really well networked, but still, like, how do we have our internal group of people who are working really hard on this be flexible and resilient enough that like 1 or 2 of us dropping out doesn't knock it out? Because I think a lot of people want to know what we're doing and they want to benefit from our programs and they want to be involved, but they don't necessarily want to be like the people who lead the charge. So that's sort of like been the question on my mind in that sense.
Well, we don't really have a formal marketing plan or anything yet. We're just networking with people that other people have connected us to. But we haven't really, right, Steve and Beth? We haven't been shouting from the rooftops or going, issuing press releases or anything like that yet. But maybe down the road we get to that.
Yeah.
And Kayla, as Kayla pointed out, we need a social media presence too. That's a goal for me, is to have someone on the project team who is good at that, because let's be honest, I'm 24 and I cannot do it. I just suck at it. So I need somebody better than me to do it. So we're working on those kinds of things that I think will help.
Mhm. Yep.
But
Yeah.
ultimately too, I mean, even this is, I mean, we may think that it's necessary at some point to, for purposes of staff support, actual people to do some of the work, embedding it, or at least doing a joint venture with TCI, the Climate Initiative, in which they have a 20-person staff. And it may be necessary at some point to have some of that staff supporting this project.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah, I'm coming close after our 20 minutes here. Anything else on the project team want to say, or any other questions?
It can be quick, and some of you hit on it already, but the other thing is, how do we get out of the world of environmental nonprofits and into the world of business and government and other connections? Because if we want to maximize our impact on climate for this project, we want to be reaching not just people who are already feeling really climate positive. So anything that anyone has to say about that is welcome.
Yep. Yeah. And it's almost a topic we need to dedicate some time to, maybe at a future meeting, to think that through, because that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But we've got some candidates, and again, they're kind of the early adopters in the business community, but that's okay. That's a good place to start. So
Just quickly, I mean, we did start looking at all the B Corps, in Maine, and my small dream is that maybe we eventually wind up get some people on the board of the Androscoggin Bank. They're a B Corp. They at least say they espouse some of these principles. And if we want to work on climate, we got to go where the money is, to a certain extent. And young people got to be heard on those issues.
Yep, all good ideas. Okay,
Okay.
we're going to wrap that up. Thank you for the update, and let any of us know if we can help in some way as we have time. And okay, Bethany, you're going to say a little bit about communications and ideas for communication,
Yeah, I feel like I'm
not
doing all
social
the
media.
talking. Yeah, John asked me to bring this up for Intergen as well as it's something for youth on boards. We don't really have a way to stay in touch besides that we get long emails to and from each other sometimes. Which is, we've been thinking about, are there other ways that we can create digital structures to have community together? One thing that John and I have talked about is maybe having a Slack for Intergen. So I guess like one question I have before we discuss it is like, can I get a quick temperature reading, like thumbs up if you've ever used this at all and you liked it, thumbs medium if you used it and you hated it, and thumbs down if you've never used it. Okay. So that's one thing, it's Slack, for those who don't know, is like it works sort of like a messaging board. So it has you can use it on your computer, and it basically looks like a series of different like conversational channels, so people can write in and send. It looks like a text message. It looks like, hey, come read this article or look at this event, and then it can basically be set. Unlike actually having a text or an email conversation, it's sorted into basically different categories. There are also other options that are not this, and I would like to use something that people actually want to use. So that's sort of the beginning of that discussion is, are people open to Slack? Do they have ideas of better ways that we could all stay connected?
Haley.
I will say my personal difficulty with Slack in the past is, as a student, I definitely get like a lot of emails, first from like classes and teachers, and now college stuff to keep track of. And it's good to have like work endeavors and other projects also be on the same email, so it's not like checking 5 separate accounts and things each day. I can keep track of email and text to a degree, but I found that this past summer when I used Slack, when I was working with the Maine Environmental Education Association, it was hard to keep track of that as well sometimes, and I'm more responsive on email. That's just that might be a personal preference, but it can be like another added thing to check and harder to keep up with.
What is the main advantage of Slack, or main 2 or 3 advantages, would you say? Anybody, since you would go there to get communications among the group, or to the whole group, or to individuals within the group?
Is it exclusive to this group?
It can be,
Slack?
I believe.
It would be exclusive to this group. I'll take a quick stab at answering that, and other people can weigh in. For me, it's one, information doesn't get lost quite as easily. I can pin the date and time of when a meeting is and the link. It may not get lost in your email inbox, things like that. 2, it's a quick way to reach people that isn't an email. If answering email is a lot, it can be a quick way to message people. Sometimes I need that, and I don't like to text because I know some people don't like to text outside, like on work things. I don't know about a third one.
I think
Anybody know, Shasha?
Yeah, I think it's also nice in terms of teams that have like a lot of collaboration, because since you have like one channel, you can make a bunch of different like smaller groups. So like there could be a general channel for like all of us to communicate, but then if like 3 people are working separately, they can have their own channel. And so it's really easy to like sort everything but keep it all in one place. So like with email, I think things kind of get lost because you're like, okay, I have to plug in all the people who I want to receive this email. But with Slack, it's really easy to just like direct message someone from that group or direct message like 2 people and start a group. And everything's like in the same like space visually.
If you've got, let's say you had articles or information that you wanted to share, documents you wanted to put in a place, I guess Google Drive, of course, works fine, but does Slack have that kind of function too, where you can park information that you want everybody to have access to?
You can park links to information that would then
Uh-huh.
be in Google Drive, but
Uh-huh.
it's easier than sending emails that may not be connected to each other. So it would be like that. And you could have a whole section that was people sharing articles and people, you know, writing back their comments on them, things like that, which is something we don't really have right now for Intergen, because we don't want to like write lengthy emails back and forth about what we thought about what we heard on NPR.
Right, right. But you could post that on the Slack site and people can respond if they want to, or ignore it if they want to, kind of thing. And maybe you get a conversation going with a few people that want to talk about that. Okay.
One of the things I guess I wanted to raise is how can we, particularly in this group or even on the project team or whatever, communicate with each other effectively about time sensitive stuff, operational stuff, where you're putting something out. It's not for information, it's not for discussion, it's not so much for collaboration, but it does have an impact on what you're trying to get done. And how any experience of others in this group about how we do that in a way that we can be responsive, particularly when it's time sensitive.
I think anything that really goes to like my phone. I personally don't have my email notifications on because that would just be crazy. I do check it super frequently. So like there's a 1 to 2 hour variation on whether or not I get to that. But like something like Slack that I have downloaded on my phone, or like another app like GroupMe, or even just a texting group chat would be like almost immediate response on my end.
Yeah, so like, for example, I might send a doodle poll. I do a lot of
Your
that.
favorite,
My
John.
favorite thing in life to do is a doodle poll. But I mean, that's an example, of something I need. Like if I send a doodle poll to everybody, I don't know of one right now that we need, but when I do, it helps everybody to hear back within 24 hours, because everybody else is kind of holding open their schedule, not knowing when it will. And then if you let it drag out for days on end, it's like everybody's left hanging. So something like a doodle poll, can you do those through texting, or do you have to, I guess you could put a link in a doodle link in a text just as easily, right? So that would be, people would be more responsive to a doodle in a text than a doodle link in an email. It sounds like, yeah. Okay, I guess I'll have to learn how to do that. Yeah, I can text. I actually can. I don't know how to get the link from there to, anyway. That's good to know, though.
Or you could text, I mean, this is doing an extra step, but we could have a group text going. And if there's an urgent email, you could text the group and be like, hey, just sent out a doodle poll, please respond.
Okay. I got it.
What do
So-
others
so
think about that? Yeah.
You can have a list of, I know this sounds stupid, but it's okay. You can have a whole list of like 8, 10 or 12 or 15 people on a text, like an e-list. It's called a distribution list in Outlook, but that you can have that in text too. So it's like one tap away. Okay.
Abigail had something jumping.
Oh,
I was just
yeah.
going to add one more option, but I think Slack sounds great. I use WhatsApp in my research lab. It's
Mhm.
basically like, another group chat for anyone that's not familiar, but it serves like texting. So that could be another option. I've never used Slack, but I think it sounds a bit more streamlined than WhatsApp. So, but just, I don't know, if you like have a time sensitive thing that, you know, you want it to kind of serve as a text message, that could be another option, but Slack might also satisfy that need. So just another thought.
I guess a question, Abigail, is like, does WhatsApp have a computer version? Like, can you use it on your desktop, or is it mobile only? Because I think, like, given the group that we have in Intergen, I don't want to do something that's mobile only, because not everyone
That's a great point.
loves to have phone stuff like that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think there is a desktop or like computer version of it. So that's a good point. So yeah, I think Slack sounds great. So you get like regular notifications on like it's an app on your phone, and then on the desktop as well. You get notified.
Synchronized,
Yeah,
I
that
believe.
sounds-
Yeah. Okay, well, I think this is good feedback. Bethany, maybe you and I can debrief and think about what we might do here. Slack sounds really interesting to me because I could use it for other projects where people are all scattered and I don't know how to keep track of them. And it at least sounds like it should be a good platform for that.
And I would say, like, for anything that we settle on, I'm happy to do a quick mock-up of what it would look like, and then walk
Right.
folks who aren't familiar with it through it to get some more feedback, because I feel like I did see some like thumbs down, I've never used this, I've never seen it, and I know it can be hard to weigh in on something you've never seen. So it might be good just to like do a trial of what this would be like, and that way people can actually see it and say, I hate this, I like this from there.
Yep, that's a good idea.
So we'll wait for a recommendation.
Yeah, or a trial
Yeah.
to see how we like
I'll do this with all of my free time.
Okay, well, let's move on to the whatever that was, the Maxwell Frost. I'm gonna we got 30 minutes. I'm gonna play a clip from this just so it sort of refreshes us all on what Mr. Frost was saying. So just bear with me. I think I've got this set up so I can share it. I think I've got about 9 minutes I'd like to play. I'm going to have to skip a piece in the middle. So let's just listen and think while you're listening. And then if you got thoughts at the end, I got some questions for you, but if you've got thoughts at the end, we'll talk about it. There's some real important things that have implications for our work on Youth on Boards and Intergen. So hang on, let me get this going. I have to share sound. I have to advance portion of screen. See, I can do some things. Tech. All right. Now, I'm going to ask, hang on one second. Make that go away. No. All right. Can everybody see it's the black box with the little blue thing in the middle? Okay. If I hit play, this should play sound. So everybody just, Bethany, give me a thumbs up if you can hear this so I don't interrupt.
NPR podcasts. More voices, all ears. Find NPR wherever you get your podcasts.
You're now the first Gen Zer elected to Congress. And regardless of whether or not you bristle at that exact title, you know, it's still absolutely true.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, I'm not, you know, it's not like, oh, Gen Z's been old enough to run forever and we finally made it. We're just got old enough to run for Congress. You know, I'm an elder Gen Z. And the fact that at first opportunity, our generation has made it to the United States Congress, I think shows that Gen Z, we ain't taking any BS. You know what I mean? Like we want to be at the table. We want to be helping to make these decisions. We don't want all of this responsibility on ourselves, but I also want folks to know that it shouldn't be up to the young people to save us, right? Because we're up against, you know, a lot of systemic oppression and problems and institutional problems in this country. We need a multi-generational multiracial movement that works together. And that's what true movement's all about.
The average age of the 117th Congress was 58.
Yep.
You are 25. Have you felt genuine respect from other members of Congress? Like, do they treat you like an equal in the room?
Yeah, I mean, so far I've received nothing but respect from folks in my caucus and even some Republicans I've met, I mean, I've received nothing but respect from them. Now, the people who have disrespected me, it's been mostly online, or the lieutenant governor of Florida, the lieutenant governor of my state went on some show the other day and made fun of me because, I'm having a hard time finding a place to live in DC. So, I mean, there's people like that. But as far as being in the halls of Congress, I've received nothing but respect from my caucus. And actually, I just got elected to be one of the vice chair at larges of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I was elected to be on the executive board of the Hispanic Caucus's campaign arm, Bold PAC. And those are my colleagues who've entrusted me with their vote on being in a leadership position. I feel highly respected and highly supported. Now, I'll also say, it's my second day out here, right? So
Yeah.
I will share a quick funny story. There's a few times where I would enter one of the House buildings and, members, you don't have to go through security, which was surprising to me. But either way, you can just go straight in. You just have to show your badge. So I have a badge and I'm walking through the member line, and then a security guy runs over. He says, "Oh, this is for members only. Everyone else has to go over here." I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a member elect. Here's my badge." He's like, "Let me see that." And I showed him. And then he smiled and he was like, "How old are you?" And I was like, 25. And he started jumping in the air and he called his other security guards over there and they were all jumping like, "Only in America. And he's black too." They were so excited, And so there's been times like that where I'm stopped, you know what I mean? But people, it's not, I feel like oftentimes we think about those stories and we're like, "Oh my God, he's getting stopped." Well, number one, when we're talking about like working class folks, like security guards or this and that doing their job, we do live in a country where I don't look like a member of Congress. So I don't blame them for that inherent bias. Shouldn't be mad at people for, I don't know, being a part of this country where I just don't look like that member of Congress. But, that realization when people realize that I am incoming has been nothing but positivity.
You are, I think, wisely anticipating that there's likely to be some friction down the line. And
Oh, yeah.
with that in mind, I wonder how you plan to continue to advocate for these issues that you care about, like gun violence and the climate crisis. Like, those are issues that we've seen are of utmost importance to Gen Zers, but many politicians of the baby boomer generation and the silent generation, they don't always treat those issues with the same urgency.
Yeah, no, 100%. And to be clear, when I face ageism in Congress, it's not going to be someone coming up to me and saying, "You're young, you know what I mean? You don't belong here." It won't be overt like that. It's going to be implicit. It's going to be subconscious. It's going to be little comments. It's going to be things like that. And so, look, I'm used to it because I've always been the youngest person in the room in many of my jobs. Now, how do we get things done? Well, the thing I always keep in mind, we have to build coalitions and we have to understand that I'm not going at this alone on any of these issues. When we talk about the climate crisis, I am folding in to a movement of not just young people, but folks across this country, both older and younger, who have been fighting because they understand that the cost of not doing anything is far greater than the cost of taking bold action as it relates to the climate crisis. And so it's like that Maya Angelou quote, "I come as one, yet I stand as 10,000. And that's the way I see myself walking into these rooms. And that fortifies me both personally and my heart, right? As an organizer, to be in these rooms and be confident in what I'm saying, because it's not just Maxwell Frost speaking, it's the 10th congressional district that elected me there.
Right.
And it's the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people who believe in a world where everybody has the resources they need. And we collectively have to understand that we're not going to get that tomorrow, the North Star. But my commitment is to never stop talking about it and to always be a champion that's vocal on it, because I do believe we can have these things very soon. We just have to organize.
Okay, I'm going to hang on with me. I'm going to try to move this to the next section, everybody, and skip the commercial break. I think I've about got it. I might be a little off. So here we go.
You made a reference to the fact that you have had a hard time finding an apartment in DC. To be more specific, you actually made headlines after you were elected when you were denied for an apartment in Washington, DC because of your poor credit history or low credit score. And there was a lot of discussion surrounding you after that about the high cost of housing and our reliance on credit scores to give or deny people access to housing. But
Yep.
what interested me about that moment was that it was reported that at least part of the reason for your poor credit history is that you maxed out credit cards to win your congressional seat. What does that tell us about the barrier to entry for representing our communities in Congress?
You know, something that I've been talking about is the fact that I understand I come from a point of privilege, that in 2 years' time, I will be making a good salary for 2 years. I'm going to be able to pay off the debt that I have. But the whole point of me talking about that was, number one, to talk about the crisis of housing that we have in this country right now.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, we have to talk about the entryway to power, the seats of power. And the fact of the matter is, when that entryway acts as a filter and filters out poor and working class people who don't have enough capital to run a campaign, enough capital to even be seated or find a place to live once they win the campaign, it determines who makes it to the seat of power. And so no one should be surprised when Congress's net worth continues to rise up, up, and up, and up, because we have a system that essentially makes it damn near impossible for anybody else to make it to that seat of power. And it's important to keep that in mind. That's really the point here. It's not that in 2 years Max was going to be okay. It's the fact that right now, as a working class organizer who had to Uber during the campaign to pay my bills and run up a ton of credit card debt because I didn't have an income really coming in, how do we make it easier for working class people to run for these seats of power and to actually assume these seats so we have real representation? That's really the thing to talk about here. And, you know, I have people too, like I said, the lieutenant governor of the state, one of the things she joked around about, she said he should sleep in his office like a lot of other people. Well, number one, I think after a long day of working on Capitol Hill, I think all staff there should be able to go to a bed and sleep in a place that's outside of their workplace. But number two, most of the people who sleep in their offices are actually tend to be Republican members. And so that's great to hear, because if they're so pro free public housing, because that's what that is, free public housing, I'm excited to work with them to make sure that our people have access to the same thing.
You know, Congressman Frost, I can think back to when I was 25. It wasn't that long ago. I'm 35. So I'm not like plumbing the depths of my memory. But I've changed so much since then. And I did not serve in Congress, in case you were wondering. You're just beginning on your new journey as a Congress person. How do you think Congress will change you?
Well, you know, I mean, that's a question I ask myself, and not on the premise of how will it change me, right? My goal is to not be changed as far as my values and what I believe in. I think inherently, I think Congress is going to educate me on, like, you know, as I continue through this, on the process, on, you know, how do we work with folks on compromising, how do we move forward. But the thing that I won't lose sight of are the values and the North Stars that I believe in and what got me here. I plan on having in my office a picture of my mugshot of when I was arrested for nonviolent protests here in Central Florida during Black Lives Matter. It reminds me of where I came from and the work that I do.
Representative Frost, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. It's given me a lot to think about, I'll say, with regard to how the world might change as younger generations start to be able to assume these kinds of positions. So thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay. That was really good. Just like that very much. So just maybe the younger folks in the group go first. Was there any, you made a lot of really good points. Was there anything that really resonated? What resonated most with you about what he said? Anybody? Younger folks first. Anybody? I know you got thoughts.
Haley.
Well, I think it's
Haley.
definitely important to register and be cognizant of a lot of the barriers that bar young people from, serving in these positions. That's a really important takeaway that I think we can have from the story.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think the housing bit sticks with me the most after listening to that again. Like we think of people in these positions as, I don't know, having no barriers to what they do, but it just goes to show that they do, but not often. And it's because they're, it's the median or average age of 58 for having these positions. So I don't know. I think that's just a really clear representative like factor of what it's like to be, I don't know, 25 and trying to find your place in these roles.
Yeah, I felt like I agree with Abigail. Like it was the most important to me that he was transparent about that, because I've always felt this pressure, like personally, of like, if you're in these like positions, if you've got a job, like you've got to not let people know that you have these struggles. Like, and I think a lot of younger people, it's like you might get the position or you might get into the really prestigious program or whatever, but like there's this underlayer of like the people around you are older and they have all this worked out. And like, so for him to say like that became public and like people mocked him for it also like kind of really hit me, because I can think of like times where it's like, I have a new job and like, I'm never going to admit that I need them to pay for XYZ, right? And I think a lot of younger people like deal with that.
One thing
Anybody else?
that
Kayla?
one thing that stood out to me was his acknowledgement of like the power of having like Gen Z or just like youth in general supporting him. I feel like one thing that we saw in this past election, when we were anticipating like this crazy red wave, especially in Maine, like how important it was to have so many like young people go out and vote and how that really swayed the vote. And I feel like that wasn't necessarily acknowledged. So it was really great to hear him say like, like I might be one person, as he quoted, but there's 1,000 people behind me, like acknowledging that it's not just like a one person job and that it is not only intergenerational, but like he also represents like more than just himself as a 25-year-old.
Yeah, another thing that I thought that he stressed a lot too, in other parts of the interview as well, was about like coalition building and like really understanding and like bridging divides in that way. I think earlier he talked about like thinking about generational timelines and like acknowledging that everyone from whatever generation has a different lived experience and like has a different frame of how they view the world. And so I thought that was interesting to suggest as well, because he was saying how, some people may think of like 9/11 as one of the biggest moments like in their generation, but he was only 3 at that time. So like that wasn't something that he really experienced, like everyone kind of coming together around that. So I think that was important too. And it kind of like fed into the like understanding each other across generations.
Let's see. Yeah, did we get all of our younger folks? Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add. I see your picture by the ocean. I think you're still there. Anything to add, Sarah, before some of the older?
Sure. Yeah, I just had to make sure the cat was inside before the plow came. What really resonated with me was kind of what was just being said about like he's not alone in the community organizing piece and how he's in Congress with that organizing and community mindset, and he's there to represent people and also knows that he has people backing him up and wants to create a community within Congress and outside of Congress to effectuate change. And I just think that that is why Congress should exist, is for that community organizing aspect. And it took a community to elect him. And so I'm I'm hopeful that he'll stick with what he says, but that's the part that really resonated with me, is just that mindset.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any of the rest of the folks? Richard, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was interested that he called the obstructions and things that kept him from progressing up into this position as a filter, that it was, so this filter is self-sustaining thing that has been created, right? So the people who are in power don't have to stand up and be racist, or they don't have to overtly stand up and do this, because that filter is working by itself, that they created, and they can step aside and have clean hands, It's not me being negative on it's the self-filtering thing. They don't have enough money. They don't have the whatever, So that was an interesting idea to me.
Okay. Steve, got thought? I know you got thoughts.
I always have thoughts.
Call on
Yeah,
people
no,
now.
I like the language of paths to power. I think I know it sounds parochial and given what we're doing, but it is clear as a bell. I mean, he kind of laid out a manifesto for youth on boards and action on climate. I mean, all what he talked about. And I just feel very, very strongly that in some senses, just as maybe more women in leadership would help our whole world, more youth in key positions of power would really strongly help our world as well.
Mm-hmm. Gilda, any thoughts about what you heard?
Just to add what everybody else has said, it's refreshing to have that voice out of Florida, because when I think of Florida, I just think of Florida as a horrible place, and why would anybody go there? Why would anybody live there? And to have this, very progressive youth voice is encouraging to me, and it's sort of opening my mind a little bit that there are good people fighting the fight in Florida as well as all the other red states. But anyway, that was just refreshing to hear that.
Yeah, we have a vision of Florida. That wasn't it until now. Andy, anything to add to anything anybody said so far? What struck you?
Yeah, it's hard to describe. I mean, if you think of people's lives as having sort of segments, he made a reference to sort of, I can't remember his terms, but just this notion of a young person being at a segment or a place in their life. And, it helped sort of uncover my sense of bias, the sense of like, well, that's nice, but they're going to be even better like 3 segments later when they're older. If you're cringing, that's okay. And it sort of helped me sort of shift that in terms of I know in terms of my own progression, I can think of, there were things I was good at different times in my life. I'm good at certain things now that I was not good at 25. At 25, there were certain things I was good at that I'm not good at now. Some of them are obvious. I mean, like I cannot run up Mount Katahdin in 2 hours at 62, and I could do that when I was 25. The physical stuff, but I haven't completed the thought, but it just sort of like, if I want to put together a team of people to do things, then I think of like, what are their, not just their aptitudes, but what's sort of their perspective. And I've never put together a team of all the same people. And it made me just, I don't think it's a new understanding. It's a new perspective on the same thing. And just like, oh, what would a person at a different ages offer me? It's hard to describe. It's not just because of an age. It's not necessarily an age thing, but there are just perspectives they're really, I gotta give up. I'm just blathering. You're like, duh, or like, yeah, what are you really saying? And I can't really articulate it very well, but
Well,
maybe it just came much more clear. Let's put it that way.
Abigail.
Andy, what you're saying was just making me think. I'm 25, like Maxwell, and I sometimes, and maybe because I'm a young woman, I don't know. I think using your voice at like in your mid 20s, or I don't know, in your adolescent years, like it's very nerve wracking, and it's hard to feel like sometimes like you have something to offer and you have perspective despite your age. And I think that in itself offers a really unique voice. And it's like you might lack the years of experience that others have, but you still have something to say. And to see him be elected at 25, it was like, I don't know, almost gave me confidence too, to see that there are people my age doing this kind of work. And I mean, he's so well spoken and really just, an inspiration. So the whole perspective thing you were getting at, I think it's just hard sometimes to feel like you're, taken seriously when you're younger. And I think recognizing that and sort of creating that space for younger people to feel like comfortable and safe to share their opinions is really important.
Yeah, what I would say, Abigail, see you're really good at being 25. And when people are good at something, it's not just a utilitarian sense of usefulness. They're useful in a much more rich sense. And so we all know, because through a series of experiences and literally aging, who somebody is at 25 is not where they are at 45. I don't know if it's almost like I want to just strip out the whole age thing and just say there's some things that you as a category 25-year-olds are good at, but then individually there are things that you are going to be better at 25 than any time in your life. And some of that is going to be insight. You're going to, I've seen this, I saw this happen when I was 20. I could go in, I could talk to people and ask questions, and they would give me a kind of candid answer that those people would, if given the same circumstance when I was 45, I would never get that candidness. And I had access to insights at 20 out of people that I cannot get. I lost by the time I was in my mid-30s. And I'll be honest, I think some of it was just, this guy's 20 years old. He's nobody. Like, I can say anything. And so people would just say anything. But actually, I can remember people saying some things that in hindsight, especially like, wow, that gave me insight. And I don't get that kind of thing when I was older. And it's really valuable information. And maybe if I was a really, really well-trained psychologist, I could drag that out of people. But actually, it's just easier to have a 25-year-old who has a sense of great questions. I'm not saying, and the great questions are actually the so-called, some people call them stupid questions or the basic questions or the fundamental, but I would call them fundamental questions. Just as one example, it's like, if I want to get somebody to ask a fundamental question, I'm not going to ask somebody who's 65. We got so much stuff running around our heads. We don't ask fundamental questions very often. Ask a 25-year-old. They're going to ask a fundamental question. Everybody's going to, half the people be like, oh, that's stupid. And the other half people are like, oh my God, you're right. We need to talk about that fundamental question. I'm so old, I forgot to ask those questions and talk about those questions. And a 25-year-old would be like, well, yeah, because I don't know all the other questions. Like, I want to talk about this fundamental question. I don't know if that's a very good example, if that makes sense.
It did. All right, so we're 2.5 minutes away from, according to my clock. We're not going to get to the last item, but that's fine. But let me share a few thoughts about that interview to wrap up. I was struck by his confidence And I see that kind of confidence in all of you that are participating in Intergen. You got that same confidence, but not overconfidence. As you noticed, he had a lot of humility too. He said, I'm going to have to learn a lot. I'm going to learn a lot from Congress by being there. So it was an extraordinary combination of confidence and humility that came through. It just was pitch perfect. The other thing it struck me was about the power differential that he talked about, because that's, as Steve said, that's all we're doing too. We're trying to breach a power differential between young people and boards that tend to be old and I say ossified in their ways. But and then he mentioned ageism. I mean, you all that join boards are going to experience that. It's going to happen. You might as well get used to it. I mean, like Maxwell Frost has the courage. He said, I know I'm going to see this stuff. It's okay. I know why I'm here. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And he really was not fazed by that. And I think that's, with those of you who join boards through YOB, you know, you're going to get the same kind of stuff, and you just let it roll right off of you, I think, and not be surprised when you see it or you're dismissed for, you know, that stuff is going to happen. So I just thought there were a lot of lessons for us in his short little interview, and yeah, so clearly or authentically articulated. It's anyway. So I thought it was good. Thank you all for listening to that and having such thoughtful comments, and you know, maybe it's inspiration for us to keep doing what we're doing. Okay, so I did send everybody the very proud of our Climate Commons first annual report. So that's the easy way to learn about our Climate Common and what we're here for, and some of the different projects that we're doing, like Youth on Boards and the Intergen project, are listed in our annual report. So I'd appreciate it if you'd read that or browse it and read the things that interest you. But I do want everybody to kind of know what the parent organization is all about, which is bridging divides of all kinds. So Shasha's got to go to class, and we're over time. So we'll see you in a month, same time, same place kind of thing. And then in March, Saturday, the whatever day we said we're going to get together for lunch. Okay. In the meantime, maybe we'll be seeing Slack come across our screens soon. So, all right, team, thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thanks,
Take care.
John.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Kitty.